Yeah,
I'm
you're
not feeling great
ponytailed.
about it. Hello.
Hello. We're live and
welcome.
We've switched it up today.
We did, well, you know, every once in a while.
I don't know. I think I look good with the hair. Like I went to a stylist.
I'm glad you're a fan of yourself.
Yeah, I am.
Welcome, guys. Wednesday night, Generational Change. I'm Jen.
I'm Peter.
What are you doing? What am I supposed to do with it? Oh, I did that. Hello. We don't
And
want like Mario to be upset that we don't do it.
No, we don't. Guys, hit the like button and share. This is going to be a very important conversation. We normally wait. You know, we have an intro, but this is a conversation that's going to take some time. It's a very important conversation we're going to have this evening because we are South Floridians, as you know, and we are not exactly in a part of the country where climate change is going to be very friendly.
I'm scuba certified.
Very scuba certified.
We're going to all need to be scuba certified people. I am not kidding. I've been saying it for a long time, and people look at me like I'm like Chicken Little. And I'm like, there is not going to be drinking water for us. Like, I don't know how to be more clear with the water situation. It's a problem. And they keep building things. Where are these people going to get their drinking water? This is what we're going to talk about tonight.
And now that the water's becoming...
I'm freaking out about it because this is going to really make it real.
And now that the water's being monopolized by organizations like Nestle.
Well, they like to take our water and sell it back to us.
Remember, we never would have needed bottled water in the first place if we actually realized that, hey, we don't need corporations destroying our drinking water, but that's unfortunately what's been happening. So if the doomsday prep hasn't been if the alarm hasn't been sounded enough from the movie Don't Look Up.
Yeah, guys, definitely go watch that.
Gotta see that movie. For the satirical part is one thing, but the honest truth about what the hell is going on here.
Oh,
so without
it's exactly. So guys, for anybody who doesn't know, well, let me just say,
I'm gonna botch his name. There's no way.
I'm gonna guess it, but I'm still gonna do better.
Okay.
Okay. So
then you do it.
I'm gonna do it.
Okay.
So the other day I was just looking through news, doing my usual scroll, and I came across an article, and I ended up having to subscribe to something wherein now I pay £1. It looked like the pound sign for Britain. I don't know. I'm now paying £1 a month to get whatever publication that is, because I had to read this article. But the environmental scientist that we're having on is a water expert scientist and was apparently flying over our Everglades not that long ago and put out a tweet that was basically to me, what I interpreted is, do they know how screwed they are? And so I read the article and yeah, kind of. And now so I wanted to speak with him. And I'm going to say his name is Dr. Peter Gleick.
Dr. Peter Gleick, welcome to Generational Change.
Hi there. So now you've scared me.
But how do you pronounce your name?
Oh, it's pronounced Gleick.
Gleick. Okay. So
the E is silent.
The E is silent. Look, people have to throw that in just to make things complicated.
Oh, but it's been misspelled. It's been mispronounced. It's one of those things I don't really care that much about. But
so you are, normally when we talk about this, I'm not a water expert. I'm just saying we're not going to have enough water. We're having a problem. And now we actually have a water expert. And I've flown over the Everglades my entire life. I was born here. I'm a second generation. I've seen it landing and taking off in a plane forever. And what I want, and I know what it looks like. But what did you see? Like when you looked out what did you see that was just so alarming when you looked out and saw it?
Well, so I'm an environmental scientist. I've worked on climate and water issues for decades, for a long time. I've done a lot of work years ago on sea level rise in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm in California, and the implications of sea level rise for California and elsewhere. But flying over, I was coming into land in Miami, and it just was Florida, as you know, since you live there, is very flat and it's very low lying. And for someone like me, it's the epitome of what's vulnerable in our society to what is now unavoidable climate change. I've seen the maps over the years of Florida with a little bit of sea level rise, and it just brought home to me really how vulnerable Florida and, of course, elsewhere around the world is to these now coming impacts.
So one of the things we have here, which is completely ludicrous, as I'm sure you know, is they keep building things. They keep building things in places that we know are going to be underwater. And I don't understand this. Like sometimes I feel like I'm living in that movie. Like I'm in like this bizarre universe, but the overdevelopment, even if we're not only talking sea level rise, I don't know how familiar you are with Florida otherwise, but so we're built on limestone, like the entire state is limestone, right? So people think that when sea level rise means is, oh, it's just coming up on the beach. So we're just going to come up on the beach. And if we just build higher walls, and we actually had the head of our local DEC suggested that the answer was just to build a seawall. But when it comes up underneath, that it's not just about low-lying areas, it's about our drinking water. And I think that's one of the things that people do not do. I mean, are you familiar with, I'm sure you are, like, but okay. So if you could talk about, I don't know. I mean, he's in the Bay Area. They're not necessarily the same geography.
No, but I think
it's perfectly legitimate question. I'm actually familiar. I've done some work on water.
So you know, it's not just about what happens on the coast.
No, but well, first of all, the definition of coast for Florida is really going to change. But let me just back up for a second. Your first comment is, why are we still building in places that we know are incredibly vulnerable, if not unprotectable, from climate change? And the short, sort of cynical answer is that the people at the moment who make money building things are not the same people who are going to suffer the consequences of climate change.
Correct.
You know, you're going to build a house, they're going to sell the house, and the person who buys that house will, you know, knowingly or unknowingly, is the person who's going to suffer. Now, that's going to change over time. The insurance companies are figuring this out now. It's becoming more expensive and will increasingly become impossible, ultimately, to insure these kinds of vulnerable properties. But at the moment, we're still in a land of denial. We're still denying the reality that's coming. In terms of water, Florida is especially vulnerable, not just because it's low-lying land, but because the water system is very vulnerable to groundwater. It's vulnerable to what we call saltwater intrusion. As sea level goes up, salt water will intrude into our freshwater groundwater systems, and that's irreversible. Once those systems are contaminated, you have to find some other source of water. And I don't think we've really acknowledged the severity of that problem.
Yeah.
We're speaking with Dr. Peter Gleick, the Pacific Institute, environmental scientist. You know, me personally, I am considering, I'm at a point right now with my small business and what I'm doing for a living that, you know, I was considering buying a piece of property here, a condo. You know, we don't want to be complete, you know, doomsday preppers here, but do you even think it makes sense, especially for anybody who's below Lake Okeechobee, which we are, if it really makes sense at this point? Because I kind of feel like we're on a clock now. Like I really feel like where we are, like we're on borrowed time.
Yeah.
Tell me I'm right or I'm wrong.
No, you're right. We're on borrowed time. I mean, you know, I can't answer the question about whether you should buy a particular piece of property or not. It depends on how long you plan to be there. It depends on how long you believe that property is going to be resellable before the insurance companies say, look, I'm out of here. You can't get flood insurance any longer. I don't know where it is, but the truth is we're seeing incremental sea level rise, and we have been seeing it for a century. And it's beginning to accelerate, and it's going to get faster and faster. And maybe, if we're pessimistic about things, dramatically faster, depending on what happens in Antarctica, depending on what happens with global policies to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases. But we're committed to some future sea level rise of probably a couple of feet at least. And think about what that means, not just for, you know, a little bit of incremental sea level rise, but really what that means for the storms. Because what really hurts us in Florida and California and the Gulf Coast is the storms, and the storms that happen coincidentally with high tide. Those are going to get worse and worse. And that's where, in the short run, the damages are going to be seen. In the long run, when they're flooded, we're flooded. But the damages are going to be much more severe over time with the hurricanes, which unfortunately themselves are getting more severe over time because of the same problem, because of climate change.
Yeah, we've noticed that. And something, I mean, and I was in Hurricane Andrew. I've been in a few hurricanes actually. And the big difference that we're really seeing is that a lower category hurricane that hovers over you for a much longer period of time because it's moving infinitely slower is really all it's going to take. And that's why, like, for us, if it wasn't at least a Cat 3, we weren't even evacuating. Like growing up, like we're Floridians, like we're, you know, like that. But now a Category 2 sitting over you for a long period of time, our infrastructure is going to be just completely unusable.
Well, that's right. And you know, a Category 2 50 years ago is different than a Category is a Category 3 today or Category 4. So Hurricane Sandy, which wasn't even a hurricane when it hit New York, it was a tropical storm at that time.
Superstorm Sandy.
They call it Superstorm Sandy because they can't call it Hurricane Sandy anymore because it wasn't officially a hurricane. Caused a vast amount of flooding because it hit at high tide with a storm surge on an ocean that's now 9 inches higher than it was 100 years ago because of human-caused sea level rise. That's the incremental damage that we're beginning to see.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, it couldn't have come at a better time for the movie Don't Look Up to come out.
Have you seen it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So we had David Sirota on a few weeks ago to talk about it before it came out on Netflix. So
yeah, they sent it to me early because I'm a climate scientist. And so my wife and I sat down and we watched it. And I thought it was great. I mean, obviously, as a climate scientist who's been yelling about these things for a long time, I'm completely... I see myself in those characters. I see the media response that is mocked in the movie, but is a real, but we see in real life. I see the panic in Jennifer Lawrence's character, in the fact that nobody's listening any longer. No, they're not listening to them. Anyway, yes, I did see the movie.
They listened when it was politically good strategically to listen. But the best part to me, like that was the most telling of that movie, was the sort of like oligarch character that I guess he was like a merger of Bill Gates and Elon Musk or Bezos or whoever. And it's like they were willing to forego the entire planet to try something wherein they could harness the resources from this comet. And just the whole priorities of that was just, I could totally see that happening.
And spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the movie yet,
guys,
you could turn the podcast off for a minute. Not just that they could harvest some economic benefit from it, as ludicrous as that is on the climate side. I mean, on the comet side,
right?
But that they could perhaps escape somehow. If everything else didn't work, that they would somehow be able to escape the consequences of a comet hitting the planet.
And I love that didn't work out for them in the end. And yeah, I'm not going to ruin it, but that to me was so well. And also, I do love Meryl Streep in comedy. I think she's always underrated in comedy, and I think she's so fun. It was like a Donald
the whole cast
Trump.
Was great.
It was like a
Trumpified
Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, it was a Trumpified Hillary.
Oh, it was great.
And so what I think is important, because this is your life's work, how much of this is caused by human activity? And how much of it can we actually change if we really got serious about it? Okay, so not to put too fine a point on it, all of it is caused by human activity, 100%. And here's the story there. One of the things that climate deniers say all the time is the climate's always changed. And without a doubt, in the 4+ billion year history of the Earth, the climate has always changed for reasons that, believe it or not, climate scientists actually understand. Those natural climate changes are incredibly slow, and that's not what's happening now. If there were no human impact on the climate, the temperature of the planet would actually be very slowly going down, incredibly slowly, but actually decreasing. So all of the increase in temperature that we're seeing, all of the change in storm frequencies and intensities, all of the sea level rise is human caused. It's caused by our burning of fossil fuels, our emissions of carbon dioxide, which is a heat trapping gas, very well understood. And that is what's causing what we call the greenhouse effect. Your second question is, can we do something about it? The answer there is also yes, absolutely. Sort of unlike the comet, which is a rapid thing. I mean, the good news about this is that
climate change is a slow-moving thing caused by humans. And because of that, we can do something about it. And what we need to do, of course, is reduce our emissions of greenhouse gases. We have to stop burning fossil fuels and the other things that emit these greenhouse gases. And the faster we do that, the less climate change we will see. The bad news is, no matter how fast we change our emissions of greenhouse gases, some climate impacts are now unavoidable because, sort of like the comet story, we ignored this problem for decades and we let it get out of hand.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you something. I saw when I looked you up that it said something about hydrology, and I want to know, like, is that something that you are looking at in terms of like alternate fuel? Like, what can you teach us about that? Because we've had nuclear, we've had solar people on, like whatever, but we've not had on somebody that could talk about hydropower. So when I saw that, I'm like, is that your thing too?
Yeah, so my background is energy and water. Hydrology basically means the water cycle. A lot of my work has focused even early on the impacts of climate change on water resources, sea level rise, changes in storm patterns, changes in water quality and availability, changes in demand for water by agriculture as temperatures go up, that kind of thing. But I've also done a lot of work on energy, and including hydropower. Hydropower is an important part of our energy system, especially in the West, where we have mountains and we can build big reservoirs. And one of the consequences of climate change that affects water resources is it's going to change the amount of hydropower we get. So that's an issue. But hydropower is a good way to produce energy that doesn't produce carbon. The problem, of course, with hydropower is, it's big dams on big rivers, and that affects ecosystems. It affects communities. We've built on all the good dam sites in the Western United States. We're not going to build any more big hydropower dams, but we get a lot of hydropower in the West, in the Northwest especially, but also, on the Colorado River and in California. And that's going to continue to be part of our energy system.
I wish we could have that here. I almost feel like it should be some sort of offshore type of thing. Like, instead of offshore drilling, we should have like offshore something that takes the waves and the water energy and puts it back.
Well, there are underwater turbines, and if you can talk about that, that's a form of technology that I think could be very effective. I don't know if it can only be centered near coastlines or if it's something that has to be put out. And I know that the wind technology is constantly advancing. One of the issues people talk about is endangered species flying into the turbines, but they're creating a technology now where basically they're built with, or they could be updated with sensors. So that way the birds, again, I've driven along I-10, as I'm sure you have, between Los Angeles and Palm Springs. And it's basically just an endless stream of wind energy. But, we're constantly advancing in a way that I think is a good thing. But I'm curious from your perspective, there's always this argument of, well, we couldn't actually power the United States on renewables alone right now. Where are we from your perspective as far as, the advancing technology like the underwater turbines? And do we have that capability right now today to say, okay, that's it, we're off of natural gas and coal, we're going directly to, every renewable you could think of?
So the good news is we can generate electricity and energy without burning carbon. We know how to do that. Yes. Wind and solar are incredibly developed now. They're remarkably cheap. They're actually cheaper now than any other form of energy. We're going to see more and more wind and solar all across the country. In California, we get 60% of our electricity now from non-carbon energy sources, from wind, solar, hydropower, geothermal. They're expanding very, very rapidly. And that's going to continue to happen. It has to happen faster than it's happening now, but that's absolutely the answer. There are new technologies like that try to capture the energy in waves along coasts. There have been some demonstrations of technologies that work. It's kind of hard to do. The ocean is not a very forgiving environment. And the machinery that they would use to generate electricity from waves takes a beating. Whether or not that's ever going to be cost effective or really, really an important part, I don't know yet, but it's a possibility. It certainly works. But we have to think about it in the context of, economics and environmental impact and so on. A comment about wind turbines, every energy source has environmental impacts, every one.
Yeah.
We have to balance those with the alternatives that are available to us. Wind kills some birds, but not very many, not as many as cats, for example. And as you point out, we're figuring out how to make wind turbines more bird friendly. And I think we'll continue to do that over time. These technologies will get better and better. As they get better and better, we will deploy them faster and faster.
Yeah, maybe if we took the money, this almost $800 billion from that new military budget, and we allocated that towards some of these things, maybe that would help.
Well, it would be nice if there was a conversation that put our military budget in context with our social needs.
Right? I feel like if I say it out loud, if I say it out loud enough times, maybe I'll will it to happen. So I'll say, like, if only we would have a better use for that money. I wonder what we could do with that.
Even a little bit of that money.
Right? Yeah.
Well, then I guess it really comes down to the fact that, and we talk about this on our podcast all the time, the issue of our time is not conservatives versus liberals or any of the dividing issues that we see. It is the fact that corporate special interests have completely captured our government. California is a super majority blue state, and yet there are massive problems from an environmental perspective. Obviously, we know the things that Governor Newsom has done. There hasn't been a complete stop to offshore drilling and things like that. So I really think that this is sort of like the unifying issue of our time is, how do we get away from the fact that our government is just completely captured by these interests? Anytime, we talk about the fact that we don't need for-profit middlemen in between us and our doctors, we get the whole evo about, well, it'll be socialized medicine. Then the same thing is true if we talk about this, and then big oil will have a statement thrown out. See, even I'm guilty of saying, well, what about the birds that are getting killed? And you're like, it's not that many.
Right. That's a talking point that was probably put out by somebody in a lobbyist in the fossil fuel industry. And that's hence our problem with corporate money.
Getting the word out there. And we are suppressed. And again, you're...
Thank you for coming on, by the way. I very much appreciate it. I don't even know, you probably have never heard of us because why would you? But he does now. Our whole mission is transforming politics into service. I ran for Congress. I ran against Debbie Wasserman Schultz last year, and on a non-corporate, actually representing people platform. And so that's what we're about. And we really also like to do educational stuff. Like we like to teach people about issues and policy more than like name calling and tribalism. We really try to focus on policy.
You've seen
thank you. Let me just say thank you for doing that. The more good people who enter politics, the better off we are. And you're absolutely right. Look, I'm a scientist, but no one can deny that a big part of our problem today is money in politics and the way money influences politics. It's corrupting, whether it's intentionally or not, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. But we have to figure out how to get money out of politics if we're going to have a more civil kind of a conversation.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. That's literally the whole purpose of our existence, because we took that platform from running for Congress and turned it into this, and just keep trying to put, just to keep like the campaign going, even though it's not for a particular candidate anymore, like just keep it going. And these are really great conversations. Thank you for coming on.
From a scientific perspective, what do you feel the people need to do? Because a lot of people have different opinions about, obviously we think that the best, group right now going is the Sunrise Movement, but obviously we need a lot more than that. What do you see as being the approach that you would be taking in order to sort of rally the masses? Because we are reaching a critical point right now. I think we can see it and we can feel it. Like we can feel it down here. That's why I even said, do I really want to buy real estate?
One of our buildings literally fell into the ocean a few months ago. So
I would think that what happened...
Some saltwater intrusion.
Yeah.
So
I would think what happened with, what happened in Surfside. I mean, if that's not the doomsday bell getting rung, I don't know what is. It's kind of like
he's not going to tell you not to, but he's not a property consultant.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, but from your perspective, what do you think is the way that we should be approaching this right now?
So look, I'm an optimist by nature.
Sure.
I think we have to get politics out of science, by which I mean stop pretending that science is political, understand the science, act on the science, debate the public policy options. How we deal with climate change is a political question. Whether or not climate change is real or not is a science question, and it's been answered. But let's get the politicians now to accept the science and to do what they're supposed to do, which is represent the public interest and act in the public interest. I think as individuals, we need to vote. We need to do the things in our own lives that can help make things better, use water more efficiently, use energy more efficiently. We need to work with our communities to educate our neighbors and our local politicians. Those are all things that we can do as individuals. I don't think we ought to be hiding in our homes. These things are too important.
Yeah.
1,000%. One final policy suggestion that I want to get your opinion on. I think if there is one major policy, because we're very huge advocates for community gardens.
Yeah.
That is something that I think does have a tremendous impact.
It's just local, and it's really good. Local stuff is where you make the most difference in people's lives. And that's the reality. Whether or not we can save the earth, I don't know. But we can at least help people who are here now. Like that's sort of we're kind of local.
If there's one thing from an infrastructure standpoint that I think would have tremendous impact is if we had high-speed rail. Now, how that would look, east to west, north to south, probably a north to south would, depending on how it's constructed and how it runs along maybe major interstates. But I really think that is the type of infrastructural policy that, frankly, everybody could get behind. And I think that, as much as anything, would significantly reduce our carbon footprint. How do you feel about that?
Well, we absolutely have to deal with transportation in a different way than we have. Transportation is a big contributor, as you might know, to greenhouse gas emissions also. The fact that we're moving to electric cars pretty quickly now is a good thing. But the fact that this amazing country, doesn't have high-speed rail is an embarrassment. I've been to China, I've been to Japan, I've been to Europe. I've been on those trains that go 300 kilometers an hour and get you from here to there incredibly quickly and incredibly efficiently and incredibly cleanly. There's a lot we ought to do on the infrastructure side. We've failed to invest in infrastructure over the last many years. The new infrastructure bill is a step in the right direction, but we ought to be investing more in this country, and we've not done that.
Again, if we just took that ginormous military budget and put it into things like, transportation, small things like that.
Or if we just understood that we are a currency issuer and that investing in infrastructure puts money back into the economy, not taking out. And so it's
all right, but before you go, I have one more question. I have to make sure this isn't some fossil fuel company talking point. Okay. So the deal with the lithium and mining the lithium. So my car's a hybrid, it's a plug-in, and I love it because I have to get gas so infrequently. That's just about, I'm not claiming to save the planet. It's very convenient.
Even driving a Honda Civic right now, I am missing my hybrid.
So I have that, but then I've heard all these horrible stories about mining the lithium and then what it does to the indigenous people. And then the batteries burn twice as hard and they're hard, and the fire departments have trouble putting them out. So is there any validity to the lithium battery thing?
So here's the validity. The validity is everything we do has an environmental impact. Mining lithium and making lithium batteries will have an environmental impact. That's absolutely true. But there's also no doubt that, first of all, we can do it properly if we're smart. And that second, the impact of that is going to be so much smaller than the consequences to the planet of mining, collecting, burning, and disposing of fossil fuels. The negative press we're getting about lithium is either coming from those who have a vested interest in keeping burning fossil fuels or keeping producing gasoline-powered cars, or legitimately those who at least are trying to say, if we're going to do this, let's do it properly. I have a Tesla. It's an unbelievably brilliant car. It's a pleasure to drive. I have solar panels on my roof that power my Tesla. My environmental impact is far lower than if I still had a gasoline-powered car. Let's do it right, and let's do it faster.
Excellent.
I could not end this segment on a better note, and we certainly hope that you will come back again, Dr. Gleick. This has been very informative, and needless to say, this is the type of conversation that needs to be happening all the time. And yes, trust the science, even though so few people want to do it without a political lean.
These are the same people that still want to teach creationism in school. So why would we think that they really care about science?
Unfortunately,
you know what I mean? Like science is not their thing.
When the going gets rough, a lot of people get really scared. And when they get scared, they don't necessarily act the way they should. No. So we're going to do everything we can. Thank you so much for coming on. And we hope to talk to you again real soon.
Thanks for having me on. It was fun.
Thanks, Dr.
Pleasure. Happy New Year, brother. Bye-bye. So needless to say.
What am I going to say? I'm going to say he was lovely.
But talk about just, again, and this is coming from somebody who's like, look, there are issues, but never forget that there is one of the three most powerful entities in our society, which is big oil, along with big agriculture and big pharma, that when they want to make a point about something, they will do whatever they have to do. They will frame it in whatever capacity they have to frame it in to make it look like we're the bad guys. You know, oh, you're just mining lithium. That's so much worse than burning fossil fuels endlessly.
Yeah, but I guess, and then for me, the other thing about the plug-in is that you're still plugging into a system that is using fossil fuel.
That's true.
So at least here in Florida, you know what I mean? Like, so when you plug in your car here,
we are the Sunshine State. And there really is no reason for us not to act like the Sunshine State. We're Florida. And so we're going to have to keep working on that. That's why I can't go, because like God knows I got to save as many as we can, right? But as you guys know, tomorrow is an interesting day for reasons that are unfortunately told in a way that isn't necessarily correct, because everyone wants to talk about January 6th like it's this worst day ever. But a lot of people are really ignoring the fact that our country is in such bad shape that they could actually convince people to try to overturn an election on Capitol Hill. If our country was functioning properly, something like that would never happen, because our country would not be in a position where transferring power would be such a big deal.
And you wouldn't have that many desperate drones trying to find dear leader to help them out of this predicament.
Yeah.
And if people had better life.
I love, and we'll talk about this with Danny as soon as it comes on. I love how corporate media, especially MSNBC, likes to paint the people who ran into the Capitol as like these rich elitists that managed to take a private, it was like one person that they caught that took like a private jet there. Like, do you not understand that these are all like Joe Lunchpail type people that show up for stuff like this because our country doesn't work for us anymore?
They're susceptible.
The difference with the political right and the political left, the political right will actually get in the streets with guns. The political left does not do things like that. They don't even really get in the street, to be honest. They get in the street with their pink hats, right?
They get in the street with the pink hats. They have to wear vaginas on their heads.
You know him, you love him. He is a former Army officer.
He has some explaining to do for standing us up.
He does.
Just saying, we're going to find out what's going on. I was the first one to say, I hope everything's okay, so we're going to find out.
Major Danny Sjursen, welcome back to Generational Change. Oh, I can salute him.
No, you can't.
Yes, I can.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Always a pleasure.
So, who was the nice lady fixing your hair?
Oh, so you could see. Okay, I hope he didn't.
I just saw this nice hand come in and
We've never seen anybody get pricked before they come on our podcast.
That's my girlfriend, and frankly, future wife, if she'll have me.
Is
notice my background is different. My domicile has changed. I don't know if you could hear me talking about you being handsome. Hopefully, you don't get audio, but or maybe you should have. I don't know.
No. We didn't hear you. We just saw the hand.
Well, I just outed myself. But you know what? I feel like we should always be frank.
She should be telling you you're handsome.
No. I'm saying that he's handsome.
Him?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
So, was this a proposal that just happened on our show?
Not an official. No.
Okay.
No, but we'll remember this moment that the conversation really started.
We're holding you to this. That's very cute. So, where were you?
Yeah, we missed you, man. We really
been traveling a bit, doing a bunch of different work and personally related things, but so good to be back. And just
so are you aware we had that you hooked us up with Oliver Stone. He came on, we had Veterans Day, it was awesome. And then he was like a little annoyed that you weren't here.
Yeah, he let me know that. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, as he always does. Usually at 3 in the morning.
Let the major have his moment. He apologized. We're good. You know, obviously tomorrow is going to be one of those days where it's going to be this wall-to-wall discussion. And listen, as far as I'm concerned, any of the congressional representatives who had a hand in, you know, whether they had something to do with the pipe bombs and stuff like that, obviously, you know, look, there's a lot of people who shouldn't be on Capitol Hill. We all know that. But I don't think people are really recognizing, just like people don't recognize why Trump was president. The aha moment is not Trump being president, it's Biden being president, reminding people of why Trump became president and why we are where we are. How do you assess January 6th and what it really means in terms of, you know, just how desperate this country is getting and how bad things are?
Oh, he's already writing about it for a book, aren't you?
Yeah.
Aren't you?
Well, I mean, definitely. I mean, my forthcoming is sort of about how, you know, war became abstract and, you know, distant, and it really focuses on the Obama sort of method of like pulling war from the people. But an important component of that is why Trump is popular. And there's a lot of reasons, of course. And I think you guys mentioned something that's really important. This idea that it's not just rich folks taking the private charter plane for January 6th. I mean, the Trump message resonates. I mean, my Aunt Patty, sorry, Patty, like live streamed herself urinating in front of the IRS building on January 6th. I don't know that she's ever made more than $40,000 a year, right? Like that, like, in other words, like she got herself down there to do this. There's been studies done about Trump and foreign policy, for example. And one of the things they found out, and these are scholars, like these are political scientists who said that Trump is more popular in swing state districts that have the highest rates of Iraq and Afghanistan casualties, like U.S. military casualties. Now, Trump didn't follow through on almost anything he said about foreign policy, but he was popular because he said things that sort of resonated with folks who thought, hey, what are we doing over there? What are we dying for? Now, of course, in office, I mean, until the very end, he really didn't change American foreign policy. He didn't really pull us out of any wars. He upped the bombing in Somalia. He upped the bombing in Afghanistan. He kept us in Syria and kept changing the reason until eventually he said it's because we're just keeping the oil. But I think on the foreign policy end, I mean, I think he resonated. But one of the things that's important about January 6th is look at the number of military veterans that were there. I mean, look at the number of, I mean, there were active duty folks who were court-martialed, right? Who were disciplined within the military for having been at the January 6th.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Oh, actually, so one thing that Google is per capita military at January 6th riot, we were overrepresented as veterans. And I mean, that's interesting in a way.
Yeah.
And it's also very dangerous. I mean, I think it speaks to a certain element of the disconnect, civil military divide between the veteran and military community and the civilian community. And for whatever reason, I think there were several, Trump really resonated with people like me. I mean, not me, but, you know, people who fit my general demographic, right? Which is to say white, military, veteran, combat. And I think that's important to note. I mean, one of the most important fellows who I believe got into Nancy Pelosi's office was like a retired lieutenant colonel.
Yes, he was. The guy who put his feet up on the desk.
That's correct. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think that there's a lot of people who well, you know, we talk about this all the time. It's like the one thing that the Democrats are horrific at is appreciating our troops. They really suck at it. They really, in a way, don't have any respect, and it makes me very upset. But then again, you have the people on the political right who don't want to admit that we don't need $800 billion for the military. We maybe need, I don't know, half that amount. If it even amounts to that. You know, we think about our men in uniform, women in uniform who are fighting for our country, who should literally be taken care of for the rest of their lives if they put their lives on the line the way that they do. Yet it's Raytheon, Boeing, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin. That is who is getting this money. the contractors. And I can only imagine that a lot of the emotions that came out for a lot of the, current or former soldiers who were there is this idea of, my country has betrayed me. Like, my country doesn't care about me. And the fact that they just want to cast people aside. Keep in mind, there were over 100,000 people that were there that day, and about 1,000 of them attempted to storm the Capitol, if you will. So what you're saying is that 1%, which probably makes up, again, we went to a Trump rally. Yeah. We went to a Trump rally and we just tried to assess in the crowd. All right, how many of these are like the type of
crazies?
How many of these people would have been at the January 6th rally?
5%.
5%, maybe if it's that amount.
Yeah.
But they try to paint them as like, oh no, this is all of Trump's supporters, and it's not true. And this is what divides our country.
I couldn't agree more. And I think one of the things I think that Bernie Sanders did pretty well, and I was talking about this earlier tonight, is he didn't just dismiss the Trump voter, right? He didn't just dismiss the white working class. I mean, to the extent that that's what a Trump voter is, right?
The deplorables.
Right. I mean, but he did a decent job of saying, like, I get it, but it's wrong. Like, I get it, but it's misguided, I guess is what Bernie said, which is, I think, sometimes the more mainstream Debbie Wasserman Schultz, if that resonates at all in this.
Yes. Well, she's like the biggest war hawk.
Right. Like, I mean, of course, right. Isn't that a lot of times, like, the DNC centrist version is that every Trump voter is that we should just dismiss them. But like, that's not a winning strategy.
That's why they don't win.
Right. And they don't. I think this is what I don't necessarily agree with. Like, I don't think that the Democrats are anti-soldier or don't value the military enough. I think in a lot of ways that's the right has painted it that way since Nixon, and especially since Reagan, with a degree of like fluidity, skill, and almost panache that you have to stand in awe of, even though it's utterly untrue.
I find them all to be very pro-military because that's where their profits are. My problem with it is that the $800 billion is going to shareholders and investors in the military industrial complex, and it's not going to like help the veterans who are serving. So like if that money was for the people that were earning it and not the people that were profiting from it, then it wouldn't necessarily offend me as much. Although I do think we're way too over-involved in other countries and we need to mind our business. I do.
I'm going to go on the record and say that I think the military budget, which is $768 billion right now, but if you actually include the Department of Energy's nuclear components, the Homeland Security Department, which is over-militarized, the over-paramilitarized intelligence agencies, of which we have, 17? The CIA has become an assassination agency, even though it's against the law. If you include all of that, let's throw all of that in. What my organization, the Eisenhower Media Network, has come up with as a basic talking point based on facts is that it's about $1.3 trillion a year.
Yeah, that sounds
now,
right.
Build Back Better is how much?
We can't even get what?
It was supposed to be about, well, it should have been 3.5, got knocked down to 1.7, and then again to like 1.35. So basically
over 10 years, Mike.
Over 10 years. Over 10 years.
Yeah.
The point is that at a minimum, the U.S. military budget, if we don't call it the national security budget that doesn't secure us, because we're not safer, because we're actually less safe, it's at least 7 times less. But we're quibbling. We are quibbling over paid family leave,
right,
Head Start, a little bit of college debt relief. But we spend more on just nuclear weapons that can never be used unless the species is going to end than we do on that. And so I would go on the record and say the military budget should be cut in half. And I say that not as like some hippie peacenik, which I guess I am, but like I spent my career doing this. Like I don't hate the army, like I don't hate the military, but it's not making us safer. We're overspending, and the money is, as you said, going in the pockets of the war industry. We call it defense contractors, but that's so anodyne. In the 1930s, they called these people on the floor of the Senate, a Republican senator named Gerald Nye, who I believe was from Idaho or North Dakota, not liberal land, referred to this as the merchants of death. That's what they used to call the military industrial complex. It's what we should still call them. The things we're investing in, these are not weapons that are making us safer. What are the three biggest ticket items in this budget? Nuclear weapons, the F-35 fighter, and aircraft carriers. Okay? Nuclear weapons cannot be used. They're not usable. Now, of course, we're investing in something called usable nukes. That's a real phrase that you can Google as well, listener. These are smaller grade nuclear weapons that lunatics in the Pentagon are saying, and also in right-wing academia, but they're saying these smaller grade nuclear weapons can be used in the Baltics or in the South China Sea. And if you use these ones, they'll only kill a few million people.
Only.
So probably Moscow or Beijing won't go all out and end the planet. That's absurd. The second thing, the F-35 fighter. It's not useful for the wars we've been fighting. It doesn't really work. It barely flies. John McCain called it a boondoggle and a tragedy. And then aircraft carriers, which can be sunk by the A2AD, which is area access, area denial, cruise missile weapons that are land to sea that could sink an aircraft carrier, put 5,000 sailors in the sea. In other words, none of the weapons that we're investing in are effective for this, quote, new Cold War that Joe Biden says we're in. And Trump said we're in, and everybody says we're in. So if you look at the NDAA, 50% of it is going good money at bad.
Yeah.
And so cut it in half. But, you know, I got a 3.7% raise this year because I'm retired and I get the same raise as the soldiers. Think about what percentage of the NDA that is. It's minuscule. When we're throwing 1.7 trillion over, 10 years at nuclear modernization, which is not effective.
I just think we need to stop calling. It bothers me that we're even still calling it the Department of Defense. We haven't been on the defense in my lifetime. So it should be the Department of Offense, and I find them incredibly offensive.
Well, the last thing we were on defense was the War of 1812.
Thank you.
That's true.
So, thank you. And yet we're still calling it that. It's really marketing. That's marketing. It should really be called, I think it should be called like the death budget. It's the death budget. It's how much money we want to spend in killing other people.
Well, I also think a lot of people that have been in positions of power have been afraid to really do anything because they saw that the last person who did attempt to do something about it took a bullet in the head, or several bullets, I should say. And, we've been reliving, and again, we haven't even seen the new updated, Oliver's new updated documentary on JFK. But I really do think a lot of, what transpires, I don't remember who it was who joked about it, but it's like, Trump really, especially his 2016 campaign, can't say enough about how effective it was in terms of his populist message and all that. And it's almost like they get elected president, and then the head of the CIA brings them into a private room and basically says, he shows them the other angle of the Zapruder film and says, "Do you have any questions?"
Well, I mean, even if they didn't do that, the implication is there. I mean, when I used to teach at the academy, I would tell my cadets at West Point two quotes that JFK said, and they always stood out to me. And they really did resonate with my cadets. And I would say after the Cuban Missile Crisis, so, Russia puts nuclear weapons in Cuba, which really isn't that big of a threat, if you actually think about it. I mean, Russia could have already hit us with their bombers and their land-based missiles from Russia. And, the missiles in Cuba didn't change the calculus in any serious way. I mean, I guess they lowered the timeline. But Kennedy goes around the room and he's got all the generals and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he says, "What should we do? Give me your recommendation." Every single general, Air Force, Admiral, General, they all said either invade or nuke or both. And he can't handle it. So he says to Bobby, his brother, the Attorney General, right, who I'm a Bobby Kennedy guy, I'll admit, "Hey, we need to go for a walk." and they go for walks. That famous picture of them taken from behind, right? And they're like almost like locking arms. And supposedly Kennedy, looks over to Bobby and says, the one thing that these brass hats, meaning the military, senior military folks, have going for them is that if they're wrong, there'll be nobody alive to tell them so. And then just before he's assassinated in early November, he's assassinated November 22nd, but early November, he supposedly says, if there's one thing I'm going to tell my successor, it's this: don't trust the generals. Don't believe just because they got the medals that they know what the heck they're talking about, because they're lunatics. And I think that if you do get elected president, you have to take seriously the fact that everybody who's challenged the generals besides Eisenhower, who I think they just kind of let him leave, despite what he said, has faced some serious opposition, either been elected, voted out of office, or frankly, in the case of JFK, not to sound too conspiratorial, assassinated.
Yeah, no, I don't think to me, the people that don't see that, even if you don't know, you don't need to know the details. You don't need to know. I don't need to know. Like, I kind of know, but I don't need to know. But anybody who thinks that's what we were told it is, it's like, you might as well be a flat earther. Like, that to me is how ridiculous that is at this point. It's not, it's just stupid that we're even having, I mean, the exact thing, I don't need to know. Like, that's what I mean. Like, we know it's not what they said it is. I know that.
Since JFK was president, we've only had 2 presidents who have served in the military, literally served in the military, Reagan and Bush Sr. I'm wondering, from your perspective, how important do you think it is that our commander-in-chief has military experience?
I think that's an interesting question. I give usually a pretty surprising answer to it, or at least it surprises my friends or folks who assume the military a certain way. I don't think it's necessarily vital. I know the military well enough, like Eisenhower. Eisenhower said when he was president, he said, I'm really worried about the day when there's someone sitting in this chair in the Oval Office who doesn't know the military as well as me. He did not mean that as a positive towards the military. He was at war with his generals like the whole 8 years. Really, I mean, he was fighting with them over budgets and over strategy. They tried him to get to nuke China over Taiwan, as Daniel Ellsberg told us, another name dropping, but friend of mine, like amazing American. Like, he meant that, like, there's value in me being in this chair because I know the military, but not because I think the military is wonderful, but because I know how venal they are, because I did that. And it's not all of them, but he knew, like, the limitations. There was actually 3 since JFK who were in the military, right? So Jimmy Carter did go to the Naval Academy, but he wasn't in a war in any combat scenario. George H.W. Bush, of course, was. I mean, he was the youngest pilot in the Navy, I believe, and was shot down, and his whole crew died. He did take war seriously, George H.W. Bush.
Yes, and there's a reason he didn't go further when he...
With Saddam.
That's right.
But it's like, to me, I do think it matters. And I do not come from a military family. I have never served. And yet, I appreciate someone who has. So when we look at our governor, who we believe will be potentially our next president, to me, that is a selling point about him, is that he has served. I appreciate that, because what I have noticed since Senior Bush is it's gotten ridiculous. Like, these, and of course the drone thing is a newer thing. Like, if that had been around back then, would it have been just as bad under every other? I don't know.
One thing that I would say about DeSantis is the fact that he was JAG. He did serve in combat. And that, to me, matters. I think if you've seen death up front, unless you're a complete psychopath, many of them are, there is this pause that one is given when you're not thinking about the Dick Cheneys of the world. I think the most dangerous people in our government are the Bill Kristols, the John Boltons, because these are what we like to call inferior men. You know what they are. These are men that could never hack it in the armed forces, yet they are so ready, willing, and able to turn the key and drop the bomb. I don't want people like that anywhere near positions of power. And very often the generals are, you may have generals today that may have served in Vietnam. Very often, as you know, the one thing that's great about the military is that it really is a, you pay your dues, type of setup, where somebody's not just becoming a general for being in the military for 5 years. So their view of the way things were 40 years ago is a lot different than the way things are now. And so when they're ready, willing, and able to just say, let's just bomb and fight and whatever, I think there's also a lack of recognition of where we are today. And something that I think is very important to talk about is the fact that the US military has the biggest carbon footprint of anything that we have on this planet right now. And if we do not get serious about this, and that's what I would say, like to the Biden administration, and we can get into the fact that I think Biden is not even the president. The fact that we're dealing with a circumstance where you pretend like you care about the environment, yet you're spending $800 billion, or as you have said, about $1.3 trillion on the military. You don't give a rat's behind about the carbon footprint that we're emitting on this planet.
Okay. I'll be real. A lot of times, I'll back off on this because I'm very cognizant of how it sounds if a veteran and a retired officer says that the president should have a military background or more of Congress should. I back off on that. I don't like the way that sounds. But here's the thing. You mentioned Bill Kristol. You mentioned Dick Cheney. The lowest form of human being, as far as I can tell, in my experience, is somebody who not only never even considered serving, but never even considered their children or their grandchildren even considering serving, but is the first person to push for wars of choice and then cheer them on and then call you anti-American and unpatriotic if you don't support their nonsense. As far as I can tell, in my 38 odd years, that's the lowest form of human being. And unfortunately, we call them chicken hawks. And they're in both parties, but the Republicans really like them. The neocons specialize in them, but they're not just them.
Oh, yeah.
That's the lowest form of human. Dude, I meet them in bars, I meet them at birthday parties, and I meet them at Capitol Hill. They're everywhere, right? They love guns, but they don't like to shoot them at humans. Just deer, and then brag about how they would shoot them at humans, right? We've all met these people. And then they get into positions of power, and it's dangerous.
Yeah.
And I don't know how it happened. I mean, Ronald Reagan was a PR guy who made videos for the military in World War II. George H.W. Bush, whatever his flaws, and they were many, he was the real deal when it came. He put it out there. And if you read his diary entries leading up to the Desert Storm invasion, which I think was wrong, by the way, I think there was a lot of flaws in what we did then, but it was, better than 2003, obviously. He was really worried about the deaths that would result. I mean, you got to give the guy credit. And George W. Bush didn't really.
Right.
He was like, God told me to invade. He was like William McKinley in the Spanish-American War. They had the exact same story that the Lord told them to take the Philippines and take Iraq.
That scared me more than anything else about him.
Yeah. Well, and he was waiting for the rapture. There was a lot of things about him that were scary. That whole evangelical thing is scary. And I agree with Marianne. We do need more mothers and everything. But for me, when I'm looking at somebody, if I'm looking at the difference between Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, for example, to me, the person who has served is somebody whose judgment I would value more in that circumstance than just a psychopath who has never served anybody but himself.
And I do worry about that because there really is, I've always said, and I think we may have touched on this before, the biggest problem with the Democratic Party is that it is no longer the party of unions. It is the party of Wall Street. And the biggest problem with the Republican Party is that it is no longer the party of management and entrepreneurs. It is the party of the evangelical right. And until people are willing to rectify that problem with a religious sect that literally thinks that the rapture is going to happen in their lifetime, there is no conscience. And if you want any more proof of that, Mike Pompeo is a true believer. He is
Mike Pompeo went to West Point. That's the sick part. That's, I mean, I'm not saying I still want there to be more veterans in Congress. And I like the idea of presidents having the gumption to serve, or the sense of responsibility to serve, right? Like all the Kennedy boys besides Ted served. When Roosevelt, FDR was president, all 4 of his sons were in combat.
Yeah.
They didn't take easy jobs. Theodore Roosevelt had 4 sons in combat. One of them died behind enemy lines.
That's right.
Down in World War I.
In World War I. Mm-hmm.
This used to, and then his other son died. Kermit, I believe, died on Normandy Beach of a heart attack when he was a general. Like, I like that elite families used to serve. Only 50 less Harvard grads died in World War II than West Point grads. That's crazy. You know how many have died in the War on Terror? Goose egg.
Of course. That's why Fahrenheit 9/11, Fahrenheit 9/11 was such a, I mean, I don't like everything that Mike does, but that documentary was really spot on about the fact that, you're dying, for a rich man's game of, stratego or risk. I mean, it really is just a question of, who can cash in. That's why I get really frustrated when people say that, Donald Trump is the worst president of their lifetime. I'm like, how quickly do you forget George W. Bush? And the fact that, and he wasn't even the president, it was President Cheney. And President Cheney
Rumsfeld, the whole Gerald Ford crew.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't get worse than that. And of course, especially Cheney, you're talking about somebody who did not serve.
No, of course, like 7 departments or something. But Pompeo did graduate from West Point, I believe, in 86. So did Mark Esper. They were classmates. And this is where it gets complicated. I mean, I wrote an article about the class of 86 that got me a lot of flack from the West Point alumni. It was a really good way to not get invited to the reunion. So I was teaching there, but I won't get invited to the next one. There is a substratum of the military, though, that is hyper militarist. So it's not a binary. It's not ones and zeros or X's and O's, But I think there's still value in general in having people who at least know what death is. But Mike Pompeo was never in war. I mean, that's an accident of timing, right? He graduated in 86. He got out in 91. Decided he wanted to go with the military-industrial complex, which was lovely, which is what a certain substratum does. And Mark Esper, I guess, was in the Gulf War, but wasn't in any real combat. But these guys were West Point grads. They still have terrible ideas. The thing that's important to understand about this is, 50% of the people who are senior officers or even mid-level officers, they go into the military-industrial complex. They go into strategic consultancy. They end up in this business that perpetuates the war. The other 50% is broken basically into an 80-20. 80% are just apathetic. And I'm speaking from the experience anecdotally of like 300 people that I know that did what I did. About 80% of them, they're just apathetic. They don't ever want to talk about it again. They just want to be left alone. And about 20%, and these are the 50% that don't go into the military industrial complex.
Right.
The other 20% are like me, where they're like, I have to do something. But that's still a pretty small percentage when you really think about it. But it still is a better percentage than these young Republican, Nixon acolyte, Roger Stone wannabes who just don't care. They will send your kids to die. and not feel bad about it. And then make sure that their kids and their kids' kids don't even consider it. And like I said, that's the lowest form of human behavior as far as I can tell.
So what do you attribute the mind? I mean, to me, the worst of them all is John Bolton. I've never seen anybody worse. So what do you attribute that to? Like, what is the, like, is there anything, because, you know, psychological profiling is a huge thing in the military. And if there's any way to really get into the brain of somebody like a John Bolton, like, what do you see there? Like, I mean,
You know what you normally say? You normally say that these are like very emasculated men that are very insecure.
Well, they are.
Well,
they are
driven by their insecurities. Driven by their insecurities. And in John Bolton's case, obviously being led by a mustache. I mean, obviously. I mean, but I mean, I think one of the things that strikes me, whether it's in my personal life or public life, like watching and studying this stuff, it seems to me interesting that the men that are and it's men.
Always.
Usually. Well, yeah, almost exclusively. Men that are driven by insecurity in their personal life are highly hawkish and highly militarist in their public life. And they want to make sure you know. And again, it could be in a restaurant. It could be at a party. It could be at a bar. They're going to let you know. And it's true with cops as well, right? It's not just in the military, but also, by the way, they have the same opinions. Everybody's a hero until they have to do it themselves. Everybody's a warrior when they're sending other people. And yet, if you question them on it, even if you were in combat, you think that'll save you? I learned very quick it won't. They'll still call you a coward. My father called me a coward when I was in Iraq, when I told him I was against the war on a satellite phone after 2 of my soldiers had been killed. He's a Republican. I love him. Say that on the air. He said that out loud to me. I could have been dead the next day. I didn't talk to him for a year and a half. But the reason I tell that story is, think about what that implies about like a substratum, a significant substratum of like the men in America. There is a militarist tendency that's underpinning masculinity. And I think that if we don't take a hard look at what toxic masculinity is, in a broad sense, if we don't look at the culture in the United States, forget about the military-industrial complex, which, by the way, is wildly important, so don't forget about it. But in this instance, forget about the politics of voting and whether it's bad for Democrats to vote against war because it'll hurt them because they'll look weak. Let's leave all that aside for a moment. If we don't take a hard look at a culture in America that still exists that says that masculinity is tied to violence and that war is the highest form of a man showing his value on this planet, if we don't take a hard look at that, if we don't rework that, if we don't redefine what makes you a man, this will go on and on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We talk about it. Like when you see the horrible, anything that involves like the mass shootings, all of those things in this country, it's always men. And it isn't that women don't have guns and women don't like to shoot guns, because there are women that do that, whatever. But yet that's not where the violence is coming from. It just isn't. So no, there is absolutely a thing there. And I'm not saying it from, and you're not either, from this over woke toxic masculinity thing, but clearly, factually speaking, there's a problem.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't even consider myself like on that highly, I mean, I hate to even put it this way, but I don't see myself as on this like highly PC, highly woke level. But at the same time, like, I guess I am in a way, because like it goes too far sometimes, but there's a reason that it's happening. Like there's real value in it. And I've seen it personally. I mean, I served in these units. I served in recon units where how fast you run and how chiseled your biceps are matter considerably more than the way your brain works, even though as an officer, your ability to plan a tactical operation is way more important. Like, I know units where the colonel would call his new lieutenants in when he met him, and instead of asking them like, "Hey, how would you, just to get a feel for how how you'd be as an officer, how would you plan this next raid?" He would. This is true. There's a guy named Colonel Steele who you can read about in the New Yorker. He was the captain in Black Hawk Down, real monster and war criminal. He used to have his lieutenants and captains when they come in pick up 70-pound dumbbells and show them how many times they could bicep curl them. In other words, this is deeply embedded in our society, and it starts there, and it ends with a $1.3 trillion military budget that nobody questions. But if you ask for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, get crazy, 6 weeks of paid family leave, you're the word, wussy, right?
Oh, I was going to say socialist, because
which is even worse than the word I mentioned. I mean, oh my God, you hate America.
Yes, well, yeah. That's what it is.
I've been maintaining for a while that the biggest problem that left politics has is that they are not affiliated. When somebody in Kansas, for example, and we're not talking about, Wichita or Kansas City.
Right. Not Lawrence from that, which is like, the People's Republic, which I love, but the rest, real Kansas.
Real Kansas.
When you say the word Democrat, most people think of, Wall Street or Silicon Valley. They think of somebody like Nancy Pelosi. They think of somebody like Chuck Schumer or somebody like DWS. And when they think of somebody like that, they're thinking of somebody who hates them, doesn't value their way of life or thinking. They think of people who don't respect the military and all those things. And I'm just thinking that our division has a lot to do with the fact that the disconnect between the coastal elites and the flyover states is so bad that is really where it stems from. There isn't this appreciation for manual labor the way that it should be. And that's not even whether it traces directly to something like, the military. We could have, there's so much that the military could be doing in terms of, volunteer corps and corps, sorry, say that. But we are at a point now where the divide is very real. And I do wonder how much worse it's going to get, because there is some fear that we really are heading for a civil war. I don't know what kind of civil war people think we're going to have in this country, because there's one side that knows how to fight and one side that doesn't. So it'll be over very, very quickly. But I am curious from your perspective how you see this unfolding, and what do you think is going to happen over the next 2 years, quite frankly. And it's going to happen quickly, because as we alluded to earlier, Joe Biden is not the president. I know people don't want to hear that, but the facts are the facts. You just have to have an objective eye.
Facts, Jack.
Yeah, come on, man.
There's that, but I mean, we're 1 year out of the insurrection, which to me was always just like blown, like it's definitely been used way more politically than it was worthy of. Like but we're in that place. Like, it's not getting better, it's getting worse. So where's the bottom, and how do we pull back from it?
Well, I mean, first I'm going to make a bit of a joke that's not a joke. I don't know if I have the skill, but I've been wanting to write a novel, and my idea is this. The protagonist, who you may recognize, lives in a Midwestern liberal college town. And the Civil War begins, right? The Trump, Biden sort of like just America today Civil War begins. And so militias form everywhere, right? And there are no military veterans or anybody who even knows how to use guns on the left in a college town, which we'll call Lawrence, Kansas.
University of Kansas, people.
Yeah. So all the hipsters in said town are like, uh-oh, we got to fight back. So they find the only military veteran who wears Kurt Vonnegut t-shirts, and they elect him leader of the militia. And then in the novel, which is like an absurdist comedic tragic comedy, he has to try to train all these like good-minded people to fight, and either one of the chapter titles or the novel's title will be "You Can't Charge a Hill in Skinny Jeans." So I just wait for it because I'm publishing it. But
You're going to get in trouble for that
that speaks to what you were saying. But I don't know. I don't know if we're headed for civil war. I tend to be very conservative on those issues and think that like it's not going that far. But then again, I don't know. I think the country has gone pretty damn divided on a level that we haven't seen since like the 1850s. And as a historian, that's a dangerous thing to say because that obviously is the lead up to the Civil War, right? But there is a certain divide that really does frighten me. It's regional, it's urban rural, it's racial. To a certain extent, it's generational, right? Although not completely, because there are crazy young people who were raised by crazy parents. But I mean, and also to be really controversial, it's factual versus dream world to a certain extent. I mean, there is an element of that, but the minute you say it, you're an elitist, right? Like I'm an elitist for saying that there's like facts and then there's emotion. And in my own family, we've divided right down the middle. And I'm sure that's true for a lot of us.
And I think there's a huge problem, like on the left. And one thing I say about woke culture is that they have this tendency to try to craft human behavior in a way that they think they can mold into something that isn't what it really is. And that, to me, is a big problem. The problem on the right is that you're dealing with a lot of people who sort of pine for an existence of America that isn't really there and never really was.
It never existed, right?
Right. It's a delusion.
There's people that you'll see, particularly in the heartland, the John Mellencamp, small town America that gets talked about. That not that they're bad people, they're not. He
supported Pete Buttigieg. I take issue.
Right, and John Mellencamp was a liberal. Like is yeah.
But in those communities, you can't be enough Star-Spangled Awesome. You can't have enough cookouts with the American flag draped all over you with the gun and the Bible. And this is a really big part of that culture. There's nothing wrong with being proud to be an American. I think we are very fortunate to be in this country. I think it's got a lot of problems and there's a lot of things we need to solve.
A lot of problems with you people.
But there is also something to be said for the fact that you have one side that thinks that we're going to completely change the way things are without counting how the other side sees it, which is things are great and let's just keep it that way. I don't know where that middle ground is. I know that, as we always say, corporate special interests capturing our government is the order of the day, led by the military-industrial complex. I think that if we can find a consensus amongst people of all stripes, that it isn't about red versus blue, it isn't about whether you served or I served, or what it is that you do, live and let live. That's a very libertarian mindset. Progressives and libertarians have a lot more in common than they don't.
That's the natural alliance.
Yeah.
If we don't come to that realization sooner rather than later, it is going to get bad. It's already bad, but it's going to get so bad that, again, the rule of law is literally disappearing before our very eyes.
I mean, you're raising the nightmare scenario that isn't that far off, right? I mean, I think if we're honest, how old are each of you, if you don't mind me asking?
Okay, I'm old.
I can't.
I'm older than you.
I'm supposed to ask a woman. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I'm 38, right? So
I'm 50. How old are you? 38?
We're the same age.
All right, you're the same. I'm old.
When I was a teenager, I thought things were bad. Like 90s culture wars, abortion, gay marriage, semen on dresses, right? Like things seemed awful. I wish it was that. Right? Like that seems innocent to me now. So I recognize that we're in a serious time right now. I never thought I'd be talking about like when I was 18, when I first got into the military, even after 9/11 happened, right? I just turned 18. I didn't think we'd be having this conversation. So that's alarming. And I take it seriously. Someone has to figure out a way, and I'm not obviously the guy to do it. I mean, like, I don't have the answers, to explain to people that they're being used, that their grievances, I mean, on the right, are being used by a wealthy elite in order to, like, improve their own position on the backs of these somewhat legitimate and somewhat misguided grievances. A combination of both. Like, they're not all evil. And maybe that's a blind spot for me because I come kind of from the white working class. I mean, I'm from Staten Island, right? The New York borough that voted for Trump. Half my family thinks COVID's a scam.
It's a total hoax. Tremendous people from Staten Island. I love those people. Great people.
You know, I mean, you nailed that, by the way.
Yeah, he's good. He is a good Trump.
I mean, they love him. Like, but they're real people, and they matter. And sometimes I do think that you're on something where, like, some of the woke culture left is really good at alienating that. It doesn't mean they're wrong, but they're, like, really good at alienating. And the idea that we're just going to, like, change people by being arrogant is problematic.
Yeah, they didn't learn from the deplorables comment, right? They didn't learn from Hillary's deplorables comment. And what, to me, that's what the biggest divide really that I see is it's not that it's a partisan thing, it's an elitist thing. And that is what, and you know what, who was it who said something to me the other day? Their biggest problem, the Democrats, is their sanctimony. And
Andrew Yang.
Was that when it was sanctimony?
Andrew Yang said that the other day, you know.
That is the problem. And that is such a turnoff. And when I look at, like, if there is some sort of, like, apocalypse, first of all, I'm moving in with, like, someone like Bo from Fifth Column, or people who know how to get shit done. People who know how to make things.
You're moving to Lawrence, Kansas. That's
you know, people who know how to handle shit.
The skinny jeans.
All of the people in this Tri-County area, the coastal elite people who have to hire people to change their tires because they don't know how to do anything. They don't know the difference between nuts and bolts. Those people are going to die. Okay. Yeah. That's what I know. And the people that know how to do shit are going to be fine. So that's the biggest divide that I see. And so my goal is to move to higher ground and live near people that know how to get shit done.
And there is also a distinction, and Christina is right, friend of the show, Christina Stewart, a great Floridian, not many of them are out there. But there is a huge distinction between liberals and progressives. That distinction has to be made, because progressives are as anti-establishment as libertarians
She's talking about libertarians.
Yes. No.
She's talking about libertarians.
Oh, I think she's talking about.
But I also think she's thinking us in terms of that you're not referencing, when you say progressives and libertarians have stuff in common, I don't think you're not referencing the Libertarian Party.
No, of course
not. She's referencing libertarian philosophy, and it's not part, like, we're very libertarian
Danny,
when it comes to civil liberties.
Danny, would you consider yourself like half libertarian, half progressive? Would that be a way that you would describe?
I would say I'm like 3/4 progressive and 1/4 libertarian. But, like, okay, so look at my T-shirt, right? So speaking of what we're talking about, people look at this shirt and they're like, oh, like, look at him. He looks like a bro. I know what I look like, washed up frat. I'm aware of my own physical characteristics. It really has made dating difficult, because then once I start talking, they're like, "Whoa, no, you're a geek."
Well, they think you're all badass, and then you start talking.
Right? The Lincoln Battalion, like Spanish Civil War, like sometimes you have to fight. Like, I'm almost a pacifist, but not quite.
Right.
So we're talking about, like, a progressive. I don't want to say like muscle exactly, but like a willingness to be tough to a certain extent, whatever that means. And it doesn't have to mean violence, but in the Spanish Civil War, thousands of Americans, mostly Jews from New York City, by the way, who had never seen a rifle, go over to Spain to fight against the fascists. Like, that's why I wear this. This was the machine gun company of the Lincoln Battalion. By the way, the Lincoln Brigade, which eventually raises 3,000 people, is the first American unit with a black colonel. And they have the highest casualty rate of any American brigade ever. And they go fight for a foreign republic against the fascists. And of course, like Hitler was on the side of all that. You know, I do that on purpose, right? Like, obviously, we all virtue signal. I do it with my Simone Weil shirts and my Spanish Civil War, because, like, I'm as guilty as anybody of sanctioning me. But I do think there's some value in that, in terms of what you're saying. Like, we're gonna have to somehow rework the Democratic Party or the progressive, whatever party we're gonna be, to not be the softies.
Right.
Like we need to be soft. Like, we need to be confident in our soft, in our peace, in our anti-militarism, in our pro-human rights, pro-social safety net. What matters? We're going to have to do that, but we have to do it with a little Jimmy Hoffa. I'm sorry.
No,
Yes.
yeah,
Dude, it's like we're like
Democrats with bats. I always say it.
I have, how many times have I said the Democratic Party of the 1960s was the party of Jimmy Hoffa? Now, when people hear that, they're like, oh, it's just a party of corruption. I mean, listen.
Oh, no, we're in that now. We haven't ever not been the party of corruption.
Nobody had balls like the head of the AFL-CIO in the 1960s. And yeah, he got killed for it. But you know what? He was willing to be the badass that the unionized left was, where there was this respect between the workers and the management class.
We don't have a labor party anymore.
No.
I mean, and this is, we always come back to that. What the real change is going to have to come labor up. Like, this is one of the biggest things we do here is support, promote all labor, stuff. And that's not to say always unions are not always working in the best interest of their rank and file. That's another issue, but just labor in general, that's where we need to get behind, because that represents the bulk of the people in this country.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. And most of them aren't unionized anymore.
Right. Just workers. When I say labor, I mean workers.
Right.
It's not always union.
I was just explaining to my girlfriend what a right to work state is.
We live here.
Yeah. And I was saying, like, just so you understand, like she's brilliant, ICU nurse, the best ever, but like, she doesn't know like the political side, right, as much. So I was like, a right to work state sounds like it'd be really pro labor. No, right? Like, America has obviously like jettisoned the labor movement. Like, Reagan put the nail in that coffin, right? It was already on the way out. Worst president ever, by the way. I'm so sick of hearing like the law. Like, don't even get me started, because I'll talk about Contras and then it'll get.
Well, wait, can we just tell you that we have a state legislator who wants to, what does he want to do? Change the name of what?
Anthony Sabatini, I'm sure you've heard of him. He wants to change the floor. He wants to change the Florida Turnpike to the Donald Trump Highway. So there's that.
Beautiful.
Anyway.
That makes sense.
Beautiful.
Listen, I've heard of blowing politicians, but that's as
I'm sorry, I heard Reagan and how people are obsessed with him, even though he was horrible. That's the kind of stuff that I think of. Sorry.
Well, when I think of Reagan, I think of two presidencies. I think of his first term and I think of his second term.
That's true.
His first term was, depending on how you want to look at getting things done, was as successful as any president we've ever had. His second term was as bad as any term any president has ever had. And that is not being hyperbolic.
But I don't think it was him. I don't think he was there.
No, I mean, there's a real argument that, but Iran-Contra, which I was also just explaining.
1986.
Yeah.
Wild. Like, it makes Watergate look like nothing.
Yeah.
And I don't say that lightly. I take Watergate quite seriously. I mean, Iran-Contra. I mean, if you actually look at what was done, but the point is that somehow, and I've been arguing this, and we were talking about Jimmy Hoffa, right? We were talking about tough Democrats, like somehow, and Bernie almost could, but not quite.
He wasn't willing to go as far as he needed to go.
Some Democrat needs to come on the scene and be like, hey, everybody, truth bombs are about to be dropped. The Republicans tell you they're tough, but let me eviscerate and emasculate them on every level. And let me tell you why they've been bamboozling you with their false records, their BS, their personal cowardice for 40 years. And real toughness is restraint. And every single thing that they've come up with for the last 40 years has failed, both overseas and domestically. They're not tough. They don't like workers. They sacrifice soldiers. And don't get me wrong, our Democrats have too, but that's because they were acting like Republicans because they were scared of you voters. And I'm here to tell you it's time to stop being scared. I'm waiting.
I think you need to run, is what I think. Don't act like that's never occurred to you and no one's ever said that to you, because I'm sure they have.
It's been mentioned to me many times, but I don't know.
That would be, honestly,
I'm sick of it. I am sick of it. I am sick of explaining this. Like, I mean, not that I'm the authority on it, but I don't understand why it's weak to be liberal. I'm completely confident in my progressive and vaguely social democratic, if not social.
It's not that it's
like I wake up in the morning just fine. I'm pretty sure that like I'm still a man, whatever that means.
Oh, you're very manly.
Like who cares? Who even cares? Like,
well, I don't even think it's a question of, and again, liberal is a dirty word in many ways.
Well, now it is to me, but from the other side.
But it's also affiliated.
Yeah, I'm from the left of them. That's why.
Right, me too. I'm like so far left of them.
Yeah, like liberal is bad to me because they have now become basically neocons. The neolibs and the neocons have merged in the middle, and they're basically answering to the same financial donors. It doesn't matter.
When we think of somebody who is a liberal in the context of the way that it's basically, implied these days, you're not thinking of, most farmers generally are liberal and have been. One of the most interesting things about our history is that when we talk about one of the great political upsets, we know obviously how big of an upset Trump was over Hillary, but Harry Truman was not supposed to defeat Tom Dewey in 1948. And the reason
the picture says Dewey wins.
Yeah. And the reason he won is because he won the Midwest and the heartland with the farmers. And that is a segment of the population. People love farmers and they think about that. But when you talk about a liberal of today, the face of the party are these beltway, overeducated, stuff their nose at you academic elitists. And they've always been in the party, but they've never had the share of the pie that they are front and center now. And
there's no workers. There's no worker bees.
Yeah. We've been talking about this recently. This was a tweet that I thought just symbolized what they represent in every way. You know who Joy Saline is, the CNN lawyer. Okay. Mm-hmm. So she puts out a tweet the other day saying, smart voters know to vote for more Democrats to nullify representatives like Joe Manchin. And I'm just thinking, this is it in a nutshell. This is all of it. This is, if you want to put one tweet on the board and say, this is why people hate liberals, this is it. Because this is not only with the first implication of you're a moron if you don't listen to us, but it's this other implication of we just need to elect a few more Democrats and then things will be okay. It's like, guys, this is all of it right here.
But it's like historically inaccurate. I mean, look, Obama had a supermajority and the best we could get was Obamacare. So I'm tired of people, especially certain very disgruntled, miserable crones that couldn't beat Donald Trump, going on doing interviews and talking about if only we elect more Democrats, that's going to solve our problems. I find that infuriating.
So I've actually never talked about this on a show before, but like, if I may, for like 2 minutes.
Sure.
I think what we're getting at is, so like I didn't come from a particularly upper class family. I wasn't indigent or anything, but single mom. I lived with my grandparents and my mom half of the week, right, growing up. The reason I am who I am is my grandfather, right?
Same.
Joseph Bubsy Peatley, 33 years in the FDNY, right? Born in 1927. He dies 4 blocks and the same size bungalow away from where he is born. In Midland Beach, Staten Island, New York, the garden spot of the Western world, where the Verrazano Bridge is your Pikes Peak. But this is what's interesting, and this is what the Democrats need to get back, and I don't know how. He used to laugh at his sons when they tried to become kind of Republican in the 80s, Like when they tried to be Reagan Democrats, he was like, no, you don't. FDR, New Deal. Like Democrats are for the working people. But here's the other crazy thing. The guy was in the Navy in World War II. He was born in 1927. He lied about his age to get in 1944 when he was only 16. But when my uncles called me a race traitor because my first girlfriend was Puerto Rican, he called them on it and said, what are you talking about? Like, you think there aren't white trash in our neighborhood? What's wrong with them? They're just like, they're better than us, actually.
Yeah.
That guy wouldn't have voted for Republican if you put a gun to his head. And I want to, and that's because of labor. That's because of Social Security. That's because, but he wasn't, people usually put that guy, like my grandfather, in a box, and they say he must have also been racist. And don't get me wrong, he used the phrase like colored and Oriental. I'm not going to lie. But he defended equality. He was for the Great Society. He was for the Civil Rights Act. And I'm just wondering, I don't think he was that much of an anomaly. I think there's more of that out there than we give credit for to a certain extent. I'm not saying he wasn't special, but somehow it's lost. And he was that Hoffa Democrat because he would also punch you in the face. And I'm not saying that's necessarily like the way our society should go, but like we were talking about, there's a certain toughness that's been ceded to the Republican Party, and it's unearned. It's unearned. These guys are dandies in suits who love war but won't send their own children to it. And somehow we've got to work that out. And like Joe Manchin thinks on some level that he's the heir of that, of people like my grandfather. But he's
right.
not. But he's
no, that's owners, not workers. He comes from coal owners. And I really wish people would understand that about him. He is not in any way representing the miners and the working people of West Virginia. That is bull. He represents coal owners. And I think that is a huge distinction.
Well, I also think that we're at a tipping point where we also have to recognize that the Clintons have a lot to do with why the party ended up where it ended up. And there really needs to be a reckoning because it's already being talked about. Unless there is a major progressive uprising, somebody steps up. You're looking at who's out there right now. You see that Biden is completely faded. You're seeing that Kamala has no popularity. They are going to try to manufacture Pete.
Good luck with Buttigieg.
They're trying to get Hillary back to the main stage again. And it's like, if we do not rid ourselves of Clintonism, which was the transition away from unions to Wall Street banks, they are the ones who created this mess, who made the Democratic Party the Republican Party, and the Republican Party the party of the religious crazes.
Well, no, that happened independent of this, okay? That happened on its own. That was a Reagan thing and the evangelicals and the crazies. What the Clintons did was they took this and put the final nail out of it representing labor whatsoever, and it became a completely corporate party. So, yeah, that was them. And, yeah, we have nobody to save us.
And then you got, and of course, they got people like Biden on board saying that we're going to give the death penalty to everybody, including like jaywalkers, basically. I mean, this is
the crime bill.
It is crazy. That's not the Democratic Party that captured America from 1932 to 1968. I mean, think about it. Between 32 and 68, there were how many Republican presidents? This many.
One.
And that Republican president would be considered a socialist today.
Pretty much.
He graduated from West Point in 1915. He serves in the military for 31 years. He wins World War II. He's from Abilene, Kansas. Not so cosmopolitan. It's just down the road. But the top tax bracket was 93%, 94% under him.
Yeah, that's a socialist. That's a crazy person.
Eisenhower couldn't even get elected as a Democratic president anymore. They call him a socialist.
Okay.
All right. You want to have a little fun before we wrap up this conversation?
We did have, just so you know, Danny, we had a Festivus party, and we did have people on airing their grievances, because that's one of the things we have to do on Festivus, air our grievances. And we have a question for you. Please elaborate on the problems with Mayor Pete. So if you would like to air some grievances about Mayo Pete, please feel free.
Boy. I've got two main ones. One, McKinsey Group.
Thank you.
Let's start out with his consulting for one of the worst military industrial complex tied consultancies ever. But I'm gonna be a little petty. I'm gonna be a little petty, except it's not petty at all, I don't think, but maybe it is. I have never heard somebody more excited to tell you about their military record ever when they never saw an ounce of combat. Now, seeing an ounce of combat doesn't make you a better person, doesn't make you a better person. Obsessed with it. He drove colonels around and did a little bit of intelligence work for a couple of months, but he wants you to believe that means that he knows everything about foreign policy, when really he's a corporate shill who's owned by the people who own McKinsey. And I just resent it, and I think that most veterans I know do, and I wouldn't like to have a beer with him, and that's a bad sign.
Yes. Well, there's nothing I like about him. I think he's Manchurian. I think he's just basically Hillary Clinton. He's Hillary Clinton in a gay man suit. And just like I think Kamala Harris, I think Kamala Harris is Hillary Clinton in a black woman suit, if you want to call her that.
I love everything you just said. I wish I wrote it down.
Yeah, no, and that's you can use it whenever. But I mean, and that's the thing. Like he is vapid. He is not. He is a man. He's like the Spice Girls of politics, people. He is a man.
Not even the best Spice Girl, like one of the worst.
He's like Sporty Spice,
and that's how you know that. And that's how you know that DeSantis really served, because he never talks about it. He never brings it up.
No details, right?
No. Which also speaks to the fact that when you do see combat, it's just a completely different world, and there's a completely different way of looking at the world when you've either seen people killed or you've had to kill. And once that happens, it changes everything.
Since we're having fun, ask me a question about anything that doesn't involve combat, anything involving politics right now, anything, any question or anything.
How bad are the Democrats going to get destroyed in the midterms?
The thing about that is, when I think about the midterm elections, it brings me back to that time when I was in Kandahar. And I saw what the Taliban was capable of, and it reminded me of the limits of political power. And listen, I was brave, but not everybody was. And that reminds me how important my military service was. And God bless America, and I hope that we all remember that. That's Pete Buttigieg every time. You name any question, and he's going to find a way to tell you he's a veteran.
Oh my God, he really. And again, I said this on the Festivus live stream, and we can wind down with this. You know, I told we had it was Crystal Ball, Judah Friedlander, and Carol Roth, and I said, if you really want to know who Pete Buttigieg is, he was willing to go along with the Democratic establishment rigging the primary in Iowa in his favor against Bernie. And when he's confronted by the press right after, because they got caught red-handed with the app benefiting his precincts, you know, he's walking to his car with this look on his face, and he doesn't say a word. A crazy face. And I'm just thinking, don't you ever allow a guy like this anywhere near levers of power, because this is as dangerous a person. You may not think it looking at the man.
Oh, I do. I think he looks like a psychopath.
When somebody like Joe Biden tells you that he sees himself more in Pete Buttigieg than anybody else, that should mean to run as far away from that guy as you possibly can.
Also, he doesn't see himself in people. Like, they're so different. And so, like, I mean, in some ways they're the same, but they're so different.
But I think also Biden is delusional. So, you know, that's
I wish Biden just could have freeze framed himself in that one great anti-apartheid speech he gave. Like he gave one really good speech on
in his
apartheid.
whole life, like in his whole political life.
You ever feel like if he would have just listen, I don't want to wish morbidity on anybody. I mean, I'm sure people love him, but if he would have just had a heart attack right then, God, we would remember him better. You know,
Lord, that is a really cold thing to say, but I
don't want that. I'm just saying, like, it'd be better for his, like.
Well, he'd be going. You know what? He would be going out on a high note. It would be much more.
Because he has his moments. I mean, he does. Right. I mean, he's had his moments. I mean, he has. He's been decent on Afghanistan. You know.
My God.
No, he's terrible. Oh, what are you working on now? So, are you teaching? Is that the whole thing, or is that why you're in Kansas?
No, I'm in Kansas. My kids are in Kansas, so I just work from here. I have a book coming out that's going to be called The New Barbarians, which is basically arguing that American warfare has gone digital, essentially, or it's gone proxy. Yeah. And so it explains why war will continue forever or indefinitely because we've gone to drones and mercenaries and proxies and eventually probably AI to a certain extent so that we don't die. Lots of foreigners do. The American people don't notice. There's no draft. Less American soldiers are killed. It's never on the news, and this can go on forever. And so it's kind of predictive, but it's also a reflection of the last 20 years and why the war on terror developed as it did.
Okay, when is that coming out?
Should be August of 2022.
Oh, and then we'll have you back.
Yes, and also co-editing a collection with Andrew Basovich, who you may know, called Paths of Dissent, which is 18 essays by other anti-war veterans. I wish I could tell you there was more than 18 of us, but I'm pretty sure.
They just didn't necessarily get together for this project.
I think I got all 18, actually. No, I'm kidding. There are more, but of the authors who are anti-war and the veterans.
Last thing that I want to ask.
And that's actually with Metropolitan out of Macmillan, so that's going to be out there.
Well, whenever these things come out,
please let us know. Well, you have an open invitation to come on the podcast whenever. So there's.
You bring me on if you want to do Festivus stuff. You know.
Well, okay. Now that I know that you're interested in celebrating, we'll invite you.
I'll air grievances if you want to do feats of strength or whatever.
We needed somebody for feats of strength. Okay, now we know what we're gonna have to do this year.
Danny, right. Danny, I'm strong. I ain't as strong as you, man. I can tell you're
yeah, but like I was saying before the show, when you guys could see Chris over here, and you're like, "Who's that pretty girl fixing hair?" I was like, "I hope you couldn't hear me talk about how handsome he is."
Well, thank you, but
I feel like I have to.
I have no
filter. Your face because it's hanging in your face.
So the last thing that I did want to ask you about is there is this constant talk about what the president can do, what they can't do, and it's all about Congress, this, that, and the other thing. The executive branch is a separate but equal part of our government. The president of the United States has the power to do an immense amount of good to actually change this country without even needing to deal with Congress. And you could call them whatever you want, but there's a reason why, Washington, Lincoln, and FDR, my favorite's Teddy, but very often they are regarded as the greatest commanders in chief that we've had because of what they did as chief executives. And so I'm curious from your perspective, how do you see things unfolding in 24 if a potential non-corporate progressive were to step up and run? Do you see it as Framware, thank you so much for your support.
There are none of those people unless Danny wants to do it.
Well, Danny's not running for president.
No, I know.
But
there are none of those people.
But from your perspective, do you think that it could be a different result this time with this whole idea of, look, you tried the Trump way, you saw what you got. You tried the second Obama reincarnation Biden way, that didn't work. Is it time to finally try a non-corporate path? Do you think that message could potentially resonate in 24, especially if the Democrats get shellacked in the midterms as we're expecting them to ultimately get?
I think you're onto something. And it's one of those, like, things have to get worse before they get better situations.
That's what I've said.
I can't help but wonder if we have to get annihilated in 2022 in order for the desperation of that to bring forth a candidate who is the progressive Trump. And I don't mean Trump in his like bad tendencies, which were legion, right? But I mean, Bernie was amazing. Like, I will go to my grave a Bernie fan, but he had his limits. I don't know if it was generational. I don't know if it was personality. He was still saying Joe Biden was his friend. I'm like, Joe Biden's your mortal enemy. Sorry.
Thank you.
Like everything he stood for your whole career. When I saw you on Bill Maher before anybody cared who you were, but I'm a geek and I was watching, and so were you guys. Yeah. I was like, he's your enemy. Like, that's what you were talking against 10 years before you ran for president, right? When I first knew who you were. I do wonder if 2024 is maybe the year for some progressive to stand up and be that forward in the way that Trump was, but in the service of good. To stand up there and say, hey, guys, guess what? War's bad. $1.3 trillion on the military, that's silly. We don't even have health care for everybody. Also, it doesn't make you weak to say it. Like, I want somebody to go up there and say curse words on the stage almost. Right? If I may. I mean, seriously, like.
I think you should do that.
No, I want to go up there and can I say it? I can't say it on the show.
Yes, you can.
I want to go up there and say, hey, guess what? You're not a fucking tough guy because you're in favor of war and you hate women's paid leave after they have children that you created. That doesn't make you tough. Like, someone needs to get up there and just say these things and do it in a way that doesn't sound preachy in the way that so much of the woke culture has gotten the reputation of. And I don't know that it wouldn't work. And also be willing to say, oh, by the way, farmers, workers, you got a bad deal. The Republicans have been bamboozling you. We're not promising you that government's going to solve it all, but I bet you government can do a little more than these PACs, right? These super PACs and these Koch brother oriented organizations that told you that like libertarian values are going to save your family farm, because that's all garbage. I mean, someone has to get up there and do that. Unfortunately, that may require losing badly in 2022 because, as we said, like, some things got to get worse before they get better.
I think anybody who runs for president can say, I have the legal authority as the commander in chief to expand Medicare to everyone because we are living through a health crisis. And the second everybody gets Medicare is when it's all over for
right. Then it would never go back.
Then you have, I, as the commander in chief, have the authority to cancel student loan debt. You cancel student loan debt, you literally will swoon the economy in a way that hasn't been seen probably since the Clinton 90s. So maybe even more than that. Then
you're such a history geek.
You can be, you can decriminalize all narcotics, which they should be. You could end every war.
Right. Point being, our president's doing none of the above.
So when somebody says the president, well, first of all, that's also the comfortable liberals always defending the status quo and saying the president should be protected and this and that. No, the president should not be protected. He is not a demagogue, even though a lot of people want their presidents to be demagogues. They have the capability of actually doing these things.
People like leaders.
Yeah, they do like leaders.
Because people are followers.
But as cliche as this is, Mr. Sjursen, I think you remember Spider-Man as we do, the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. But it's true when he says, with great power comes great responsibility. And if you have that power, you can do amazing things. Now, will they threaten or potentially try to kill the person who does this? Absolutely. But you know what?
Sure.
The second the people wake up, that's when it's all over. That's when it's all over, because they're never going to look at it the same. It's like the people like us that have been waking up over the past 5 years during this whole Bernie Trump phenomenon are people who are trying to shake the ones who are who haven't been red pilled yet. They're still on the blue pill, trying to tell them, no, I'm telling you, things really aren't the way you think they are. And the second you wake up, you cannot go back to sleep. And that's why these conversations are so important to have.
I've got one last bit before we end. And
Okay.
it just reminded me because you mentioned the student loan thing.
Please.
The GI Bill. Everybody loves GI Bill, right? I mean, my girlfriend, fiance, future wife, you said it might have been a proposal on the show. It wasn't, but
now I kind of want to see her though.
Come on, she's gonna come over. She's got a Led Zeppelin.
Let me see. Now I have to see. I need to see.
No, you have to. You have to.
Look,
They want to see
future
the
Mrs.
popularity
Sjursen,
now.
I'm sweet on your man, so I need to see. Oh,
Aw.
okay. Hi.
Very.
Okay, first of all,
Very cute.
he's adorable. I'm just telling you, and I always tell him, like, there's two particular guests that we have that I just feel like I am very sweet on, and I'm sorry, but your guy is one of them.
I understand too. I get it. I get it. I'd be upset if you didn't adore him, actually.
Okay, thank you. Thank
So, yes.
Good shirt,
he's
too.
one of my faves.
Oh, what does she have, a Led Zeppelin shirt?
There you
Oh,
go.
that's
Yeah,
right.
that's what that is. She's
Okay,
got.
so clearly you have
This
taste.
is like kind of a.
It was nice to meet you. That's so sweet. I'm
Yeah,
happy for you. You look
I
happy.
know it's been like a whirlwind 6 months, but the GI such a
GI
weird,
Bill.
such a weird transition back to the GI Bill and wonkishness. Okay, so the GI Bill after World War II, right? It's housing, mortgage relief, and the ability to get cheap mortgages, right, with zero down, and it's college, right? The thing is, this is a big government program, one of the biggest ever at that time. It pays off 3 times. In other words, what the government spent, it's at least 3 times that. It's profitable for the government, in other words. The increase in productivity is there. So when we try to increase the GI Bill after 9/11 and make it effective for our veterans, George W. Bush is against it, and so are the Republicans, including John McCain, of all people. Do you know what the increased tax was going to be on the top 1% in order to make the GI Bill a little better after 9/11? It was like 0.03%. And they all voted against it. But once it got through the Senate and the House and got to George W. Bush, he couldn't not sign it. Like, it was just going to look too bad. So he signed it, even though he had made some speeches saying he was against it. The whole point is that is the kind of stuff that a tough Democrat is going to bring up and be like, you guys like soldiers? No, you don't. You're hypocrites. And that's the point that I think is so interesting about what you're saying about, sort of college relief and, healthcare and all that. We've got to somehow, and I don't know how you do this because it's not as sexy as like weightlifting and killing brown people or whatever.
Oh, come on, man.
Which that's what resonates with a lot of these people on the right. The stuff that makes me unable to sleep at night, but somehow we got to make that stuff just as masculine, just not even masculine. Screw that. Like, just as important, just as tough. And that's the challenge. And I wish I had the answer to how to do it, but
we are doing that. That's what we're doing. I think
we will talk about this the next time you come on, but I think there really has to be a deep dive on what happened to Tulsi Gabbard in particular.
How did you get to that with this? Like, where's the segue? I'm sorry. Okay.
Have you guys ever had Tulsi on?
No. We actually would speak with her if
of course.
she knows
She
who
will
we
email after this, maybe.
Why not? And the way I see it is that I think from her perspective, I think she did what she did partially for career, but partially because she just got sick of the way that the Democratic Party, the Democratic establishment treats veterans. And I think that I even said, look, she may not be a Republican, but if she ran in the Republican Party, they would have respected her even if they didn't necessarily vote for her. They would never have treated her the way that she was treated. And I do think that something needs to be said about her odyssey, because everyone thinks that, oh, she's just a grifter, this and that. I'm like, listen, nobody is a grifter the way Dave Rubin is a grifter or some of these other guys are grifters. She at least is somebody who not only has served our country, she's still serving it. And she serves in a position where she's literally around bullets flying all the time. So I have nothing but respect for her and what she's done. I obviously disagree heavily on a lot of things that she has done, but something can be said about the way that everything that transpired with the way that she was loyal to Bernie and was willing to take on the status quo. And everyone and many people just kind of forgot about that. The fact that she literally was being primed to be one of the rising stars in the party, and she was willing to give that up because it was more important to have integrity about the electoral process. And to me, that is the crux of a lot of the whole liberal elites, because liberal elites will never fight in war, but they sure as shit will send you over there to die in it. And that to me is a big problem with where we stand today. Her story is a story that hasn't really been told yet. And if you have a connection with her and she'd be willing to come on and talk about it, we'd have her on in a second, even if we don't agree with her. But it's still important to hear.
I think it would be an interesting conversation. Shoot me a line. I have a vague connection, but I will say what's interesting, I think, about her, and we'll leave it there, is that how quickly your veteran status, even in combat, won't save you from being called a Russian asset or a traitor. Or, I mean, that to me is part of the story, is how quick your dissent will send you into traitor territory these days.
They did to her what they did to John Kerry in 2004. And I don't even like John Kerry. And they treated this Vietnam War hero as if, he's just a traitor to our... I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy.
The National Guard, the Air National Guard guy who didn't go to Vietnam was calling John Kerry a coward who had won medals and a Purple Heart the country that the Air National Guard president avoided. All that needs to be said, that's the Republican Party, and someone has to go out there and say it with a few curse words and a little bit of Jimmy Hoffa.
I vote for you. I'd vote for you.
Danny Sjursen, the man, the myth, the legend, and a guest who is always welcome on our show.
And please do the audio. You know, I'm lazy now, and I'm an audiobook person, so I'm just saying.
I will. Well, in my last book, I did read the audio, which was a nightmare.
I liked it, though, but see, I felt like I knew you so well from that experience.
Well, I'm glad you liked it. And that makes it worth it, because it was.
You have to do it.
Did we lose him? I think
Something
we did.
happened. It's okay. We were wrapping.
Thank you, soldier.
Thank you, Danny.
A great man and a great guest. And obviously the conversations are always great. I have to say there was this cartoon that, and I think Stephen Colbert was involved with it. It was on, I think it was on either HBO or Showtime. And it was basically all the presidential candidates on the Democratic side. And they didn't even refer to Tulsi as Tulsi Gabbard. They refer to her as, she's the Russian asset. And I'm just thinking.
I just wasn't sure how you segued into Tulsi. I was just trying to figure out like how that came up with Tulsi, with what he was saying.
Well, I think it's this whole like evolution of the way that the way that the party elites, Hillary's no different than a Bill Kristol or a John Bolton. Because she does the same thing. She's a total neocon warhawk. 100%. And says that somebody is a Russian asset. I mean, that's no different than just calling them a coward or that they're not American. And so that whole evolution, and that's why, like I said, when he said Jimmy Hoffa, I'm like, how many times have I been saying the Democratic Party is not the party of Jimmy Hoffa anymore? But as much as people look at that and think, well, that's a bad thing, like, not really. Because you need a person with big cojones.
You and he would be good friends, I think. Like you're the same age. He's a total history.
I would hang out with him in a heartbeat.
He's definitely he's very cerebral.
Absolutely. And tomorrow night.
And yet badass.
You don't want to, let me tell you something. I know guys like Danny Sjursen from Staten Island.
Love him.
You do not want to, it doesn't, we're already demonetized. You don't fuck with guys.
No.
He is about, he's about 5'7", 5'8". He's very stocky. He's very strong, and
he's not afraid.
He ain't afraid of nothing. Like that guy will literally wrestle you into the ground, and he'll pin you, and you won't be able to breathe. So I like I said, I know his kind.
And yet, totally understands the concept of toxic masculinity.
100%.
I love that so much.
100%, because he punches up. He doesn't punch down. That is also a big difference.
But the masculinity thing is a huge issue, and I'm not saying that as some real feminist. I'm not like that at all. But it's like. It is not a coincidence that the violence is predominantly, and I mean very predominantly, male.
Christina, I am not going to get into a tiff with you about romanticizing the military because I'm not romanticizing it. So let's not go there.
No, but I do have respect for people that serve. I
Yes.
don't agree with the premise. I don't agree with their budget. I don't agree with our mission in the world. I don't agree with imperialist empire.
People would be a whole lot
I respect
different.
people that serve.
Yes.
And I respect people that serve because they have no other options, which is like guest Isaiah James, friend of the show, has said, like that was the jobs program from his neighborhood. Yeah. So if you wanted to get out, so that is, I mean, I have respect for the people that do it. I don't respect the system of it. I don't respect the money. I don't respect the pollution. I'm pretty close to being pacifist. I do think we should have some defense, but only used for defense. So we're not romanticizing, but I do respect those people.
Yeah. Once the military industrial complex basically got their claws into everything and runs everything now, it's not the same anymore. And that's why so much of the money and the carbon footprint is only attributable to defense contractors. And even that terminology is not appropriate. But those who serve, they have my respect. And that's that. So,
look, I feel the same way about nuns. And I can't stand the whole concept of organized religion. But I have a lot of respect for people that dedicate their lives, even if I don't agree with what they're dedicating their lives to. I don't know. I just do. It's service. So it's service.
We didn't even need to do, it's true. We didn't even need to do News and Amuse tonight because we knew that these guests would obviously be very informative. And if you think that's not enough, tomorrow night, I don't know if I'll be on or not, but Jen is going to be on with Vosh. And that is going to be a very interesting conversation that will include questions that maybe some of you guys would like to see answered. Most notably, I think the conversation of Julian Assange will.
Well, I'm going to need to go because I didn't know his position on Assange until you had said something to me about that. And I find that very surprising, actually. Yes. But again, I don't have to agree with him on everything. But for the most part, Vosh's audience are very, very Jen friendly. So I've not had, and they're very nice. They tend to be left of me, but that's not, only in this country am I even really that left. So
well,
yes, I hear you, Mallory. I like him. He's somebody who has been very good to us, very nice to me. I have
see the contrast, Vosh and I can't stand Vosh. So right. It is controversial.
It's so bizarre to me because
Well,
anyway.
if you don't like Vosh, then make sure you tune in next Monday because next Monday we have a super awesome all-star lineup. We have we're speaking with candidate for U.S. Congress District 34, David Kim, who was one of only 2 congressional candidates endorsed by Andrew Yang when he ran for president. Jen was the other. And Mr. Kim did a phenomenal job against Jimmy Gomez. I believe he got 46 or 47% of the vote. So he is definitely a candidate that you're going to want to support if you want to get a non-corporate representative in the Los Angeles area. And then the other guest on Monday night, Jen?
Nina's coming back.
Nina Turner will be our main guest
coming on Monday. I get very excited. I almost want to go, Nina, I almost squeal. It was really most effective when I didn't know she was coming on for my birthday, because then it was also a surprise. But I know she's coming on Monday, but I'm very excited to see her.
Guys,
Nina's back on Monday.
Guys, if you guys have a problem with Vosh or you have any issues, Jen stands where she stands.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there will be questions.
We're not besties.
No.
I don't agree with him on everything. I don't need to agree with him on everything. I've had very intelligent, good conversations with him. I find him to be a net positive. And I agree with much of what he does say. I do. He is somebody who very much is very big into labor and supporting workers. He supports civil liberties. He cares for the least of these. He raised like $300,000 for the Palestinian children, doing a live stream for 27 hours.
That is still something that is like insane.
He decided he was going to do that, and he did a live stream for 27 hours and raised like $300,000 for Palestinian children. That's a net positive.
If he raised $3,000, that would have been great. And be like, yeah, listen, somebody's trying. He can literally make change. Like, that's how significant it is. And the other thing I do respect about him is the fact that he does have not only an extremely loyal following, but they are very financially generous.
Yes.
And he probably makes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year at what he does. And it is clear that money is not the driving force for him. It's not. because he doesn't, he's
not a grifter. I can appreciate that people, if you don't agree with him, you don't like him. I get it. He's not a grifter. He is who he is. People like him or they don't.
All I say is if you really want to know what the grifter looks like, just look at Dave Rubin. Dave Rubin is the best example I can give, because here's a guy that didn't really, look, I'm sure he was doing okay when he was with TYT and doing all that, but he grifts so hard. You should see the studio he works out of now. It's this whole grander setup, kind of like Tim Pool, where it's clear that what he does is to get paid, whereas Vosh is still doing live streams on an angle in his, his game room, if you will. So I do understand, and like I said, I don't listen to Vosh that much, but he did a great video the other day that was like 40 minutes long.
I agree with you, Ali CIA. I do think he's taken out of context a lot, and I just like him because I just do, and I don't even care. So that's that. We have all different kinds of people on this show. I go on all different kinds of people's shows. The more audience, I am still me, regardless of where I talk about it.
And I also think that we have to continue to have these conversations, because if we are going to if we're going to have that future that we so desperately want, we are going to recognize that there are going to be people in the coalition, so long as they are for a non-corporate labor uprising to save our environment, to have healthcare, and to have an economy that actually works for all of us. There are going to be people in it that you're not going to like. That's bottom line. This isn't about getting along with corporate shills.
Well, it's not just that. We don't all need to be friends. We don't all need to be friends. If we all knew each other in real life and not the virtual world, we wouldn't all be friends. But that doesn't mean that we can't support the same things and want same policies. And I'm just tired of it. It's not a personality thing. Everybody's going to like who they like or don't like who they don't like. And people are just so ridiculous about it. And I'm just too old for that shit.
Just remember, guys, everybody who didn't like Bernie wanted to always associate Bernie with somebody he either talked to or did an event with. Where did that get us? Let's not do it that way. Let's recognize that some people you need to have conversations with.
I don't need approval for friends. That's the thing. I don't need approval for it. I can be friends or like or host or
fair
platform.
Enough. Here go. Yep, there you go. That's it. That's fine.
That's it. And it's
perfect.
But what I will say is, from the standpoint of where we are and what we're trying to do, the broader the audience, the bigger the coalition, the more people that we reach, the better it serves all of us. And when someone like me goes on someone like Vosh, that's a whole audience of people that I would never have otherwise reached, that now can hear our message and come on and see our guests and learn about environmental this or whatever. So it isn't a matter of who I like or don't like. That really isn't what we're talking about. What we're talking about is strategically how we best use our platform to serve our greater mission. And someone like Vosh and his platform is a huge thing for us. So it's really about being smart. And that's one of the biggest problems that they have on the left, is they're not smart. They don't play smart. They don't know strategy. They care more about their feelings, and so hurt my feelings. And that's not playing smart. That's not how we get shit done. So how we get shit done is we build coalitions with different people. That's how we get shit done.
Christina, love you. Obviously, always respect and appreciation for your husband. And we will see you guys, I guess tomorrow night. So,
well, I will be. I don't know how I'm going to do that, but I'm not going to be streaming.
We may be cross streaming. You never know.
I don't know. I don't know that I know how to do all that.
Well, with Vosh's channels, to find her there.
Now you're going to want to come over.
And if not, we'll see you Monday. Thanks, guys.
Bye, all.